Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third meeting of the Capital Expenditures Planning Committee. We have enough folks for quorum, so I think we're ready to begin.
Just do you want to wait?
Oh,
Assume she's coming right back.
perhaps.
Christy?
I think we're going to be waiting a second for Christy. Jen, do you want to tee up any presentation or anything? But hold it till Christy gets back. I just assumed you could see we could slide by her, but noting that Christy and John are here, we have one. Jen, thank you very much for being our first speaker.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me. So this is sort of part two for my presentation last week. This is the focuses on the rec side of things. You heard about the golf course last week. So my only ask is for a feasibility study for $85,000 in FY28. The reason for the request is that, as you're all aware, the town has put a lot of work into the master plan, the open space and rec plan, even the senior needs study, these plans, and recreation is identified as, obviously a department in town to where people are looking for certain amenities like turf fields, a splash pad, maybe an ADA playground, but what's not identified is where do these, facilities or where do these amenities go? What part of town? What makes the most sense? And so looking at what other towns do is that they do these feasibility studies where someone would come in and assess our current facilities and our outdoor recreation areas, and then help to identify places that would be suitable for some of these bigger wants and needs that have been called out in other plans. They would also provide cost estimates for some of these projects. And the plans are good for over 10 years. The way it was explained to me is that you can kind of put it on a shelf and it's there waiting for you, barring no substantial changes to the area. And like I said, I looked into what the other towns have done these to just sort of identify, okay, the town is called out in the master plan, for example, we want turf fields. Well, does it make sense to put it at Haskell, maybe on the west side of town at Greg's, things like that. This came up a little bit when we did the dog park, and even a few years ago when we were exploring the splash pad, it was asked of me like, well, who says that's where the dog park should go? Who says that's where the splash pads should go? And so obviously we had internal discussion about that, but just having kind of a supporting document and research that would be able to answer that question should we ever get to a point where we want to put turf fields in. So that's sort of the summary, but happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from folks?
Question.
Please, yeah.
Are you intending to do community engagement as a part of the feasibility study?
Yeah, typically feasibility study, it would be community engagement is a large part of it.
Any other questions? It looked like this was a study for 28.
Yes,
So this is not coming in this
not
upcoming-
this year,
Okay.
yeah, the year after.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Fantastic. Oh, that was easy. We could have bundled that in with your last visit.
You never know, golf is a lot to do.
All right. The next on the agenda, we have Chris from DBW. Thank you, Chris.
All right, good evening, everybody. Chris Payant with the Department of Public Works. I'm joined by Maria Lana Rogeri, who's our business administrator. We have a bunch of things to go through. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly with the intent to keep within the agenda, but hopefully that leaves some time for questions I don't care if you ask questions as we go or at the end, but I'm going to just keep going unless I see somebody has something. Let's see, let's get this up there. So starting off with our mission, which is important, the first couple slides are intended to give some context and give some understanding of how we got to where we get, or how we get to where we get when we come to you all with requests. The first bullet up there is the essential services. That's what we do every day. And the second bullet is this is capital planning for us. We do it pretty regularly. We have a lot of stuff to keep track of. And so I'm just making the point that we have a plan, we have a mission statement, and that's what guides us. This is a very busy slide, lots of words. I'm not going to read everything to you, but if you just focus on the screen area here, we take guidance from the town in a variety of forms, and also guidance from regulatory agencies and the state. That gets bundled into some of these functional areas. It's how we organize our work. And then these are activities all listed here that I won't read, but those are all activities that were funded previously by the town, some of them several years ago. So for us, it's not kind of fire and forget. It's like, this is just the very beginning of the process today, asking for the money. And then it's, in some cases, years of execution. And I just think it's important to understand that that's all part of our strategy. And those bubbles on the right, particularly the one at the top right, these influencers. So budget funding is certainly an important aspect, but there's other things that guide us too in terms of regulations, other funding opportunities, permitting. Our construction season's an important aspect to how we plan and request funds. So all of that together is kind of a snapshot of what we're starting with before we get to this point. This is just to highlight that when we come to the table with requests, we've done our due diligence to try and find cost savings. So a couple of examples listed on the left there. Fleet configuration, for those of you that have been on the committee for a little while, we've purchased recently some equipment, including that truck up there, the swap loader, so that tank that's on the back that's putting down the icer can come off, and we can put a spreader on there. We can put a dump truck or a dump body. So we've done some things to find ways to make our fleet smaller, more efficient. Same thing with the climate action plan. That's guidance from the town that we've received, but new equipment that we purchase. Some of our equipment that we've replaced recently has been from the late 1990s, early 2000s. Something that you buy in 2020, 2025 is going to be much more fuel efficient, which potentially has savings on the backside for fuel and other things in terms of maintenance. So on the right side of the screen are just some measurable outcomes. So we've reduced our fleet by 13 vehicles in the past several years. We've replaced 17. That's important because that's money spent to buy those 17, but it's also money saved in terms of maintenance costs, breakdowns, fuel efficiency, and other aspects of maintaining a fleet. We auction a lot of our equipment that is not traded in, and just in this past year, we've brought back over $60,000 worth of auction funds. And then what we trade in, not often as much money, but still some money to the town. So $5,500 in the last year, and then $12,000 that is for equipment that's still out there waiting to be, we're waiting for it to arrive. So what I'm going to do now is run through our FY27 request. I'm going to start with the fleet. So this is a snapshot of our fleet. It's not every vehicle, it's just a representation of the types of vehicles that we have in our fleet. Highlighted there in yellow is an important point to make, which is over the last several years, the town's been supportive in purchasing vehicles, and we've seen the positive benefits of that related to, for example, the average age. So a few years ago, the average age of our equipment was in 16 plus years. Standard life cycle for equipment that we have is 7 to 10 years. We go towards the back end of that, 10 years or higher. And we're now, based on the recent purchases, purchases over the last 4 or 5 years were at an average age of 11, which is a really good, which is a good benchmark for the town, and that's a good indicator of the status of our fleet. But it's because we've committed to a program over multiple years, and so it's my thought that as long as we continue with that program and stick with it, we'll have a reliable and good fleet, and we'll see benefits on the backside too. Because if you trade a vehicle in at 15 years versus 25, or 10 years versus 25, you're going to get more back for it. So we've seen lots of progress. It's been good for that the town's been supportive, and I guess I'm just making the point that we gotta keep going with that if we want our fleet to be sustained. So this is a look backwards. Left side of the screen is things that the town approved. So 2024, a couple of vehicles we're still waiting on. We probably won't see those till about March of next year. So it'll be about 2 years, almost exactly, before we see those vehicles. A couple of trucks, 3 trucks from this past town meeting in March. And on the right side, those are vehicles that we've received since the last time we spoke to you. So you can see 2022, we got that sweeper earlier this year, so that was 3 years. Again, that's a variable in terms of making decisions about purchasing vehicles, because if it takes 3 years to get one, then we need to be cognizant of that and recognize that a vehicle we say is 20 years old today is 23 by the time we actually get it in some cases. This is all the numbers which you have. I'm not going to go through them. I'm showing this really for the top row. Those 4 budgets are where we take money from to fund things. So just a reminder that we're playing off of 4 budgets, not just the town's free cash. So this is the first vehicle we'll talk about. The vehicle we want to purchase is represented on the right, and the vehicle we're replacing is on the left. So in this case, we're requesting 2 one-ton trucks or pickups, and that's to replace these 2 vans. This is part of our sewer division. The vans aren't really practical for the work we do. They're at the end of their life cycle. We're going to replace them. We think we should replace them with something that's more practical. So when somebody cleans out a clog in a pump station and they put all that raw sewage in a trash bag, it doesn't have to go inside of a confined space with the driver of the vehicle. It can go in the back of a truck. We can haul material in that truck. We have requirements to go in. So some of our pump stations are underground, some 30 feet underground. We have requirements to have restraints. It's called a davit system. It's basically a tether that somebody has to tie off to on a harness to go into that station. So that truck allows us to carry it around versus that van that does not. The secondary benefit to that truck is that it can plow. So that brings 2 more trucks to the plow fleet versus the vans, which are 2-wheel drive. Some of our stations are off of roads, like you have to drive down dirt roads to get to them. So it just makes more sense to purchase the pickup trucks to replace these vans. We've purchased a few of these trucks in the past, and their primary purpose is hauling material and plowing roads. But that little box on the right, just to highlight an example of fleet configuration. So 2020, we had 14, we're down to 12. We think we could potentially get to 10 in the future. Each one of those trucks is in $350,000 to $400,000. So a reduction in any of them is a savings to the town, but we've reduced by 2 and potentially could reduce by 2 more. And that's because of, one reason is because of that picture I showed earlier, which was the swap loader, where we can have trucks do multiple things versus having a truck that only does one thing, which, sometimes you have to have that, but we prefer to have trucks that could be multi-purpose and do a variety of things. This is a loader we're going to replace. It's from 2001, so it's 24 years old. And by the time we replace it, 25, 26 years old. We are not going to replace. So this loader on the screen is probably about $225,000 to replace. That's not what we've requested, because we intend to replace it with a smaller loader, which is in the 150 range, which is what you see in the request. So up front, I mentioned 2 trucks that we might pay a little bit more for to replace those vans. But we balance that with this, which is, we're going for a smaller vehicle to replace this vehicle, and kind of counter some of those costs. It's a skid steer. We use it for all kinds of various things. In everything we do, it needs to be replaced. An admin vehicle. One on the left is an old admin vehicle, was passed down. We don't actually use that vehicle anymore because it's not roadworthy. And the one on the right, just a picture of an example of what we would get. We have purchased EVs recently, and that's what we would intend to replace it with, subject to funding, and that's in compliance with the town's policy on vehicles. This is transition to water. So these are the water projects we're looking at this year. I'm going to talk through each one briefly. So this has been a routine article for us, requesting funding to support replacement of valves. Those blue dots in that map on the top represent valves all throughout the town. Those valves need to work for us to turn the water off if there's a water break or if we need to do maintenance. The picture in the center is an example of one that came out of the ground. So the one on the right is a new one. Over time, they're underground and they need to replace it eventually. So this just allows us to do that work. It's generally a substantial cost. So the request is for $75,000. It may not cost exactly 75. It might be 42 or 50 or something, but it's more than $25,000, which is the requirement for capital. These are definitely going to last more than 5 years. So we feel it fits the capital, even though the sum of money is a little bit smaller than what we're typically asking for. This is funding to support water main replacement. So that box there, you don't need to read anything inside that box. The intent is just to show that we have a plan for water line replacements. And this money is just to kind of keep us moving on the next effort to design replacements for water lines. This funding pays for water meters. So we're updating our water metering system. We've been working on this for a while. And so this funding just allows us to keep purchasing those meters and installing them. Not much to see on that picture because it's all underground, but that's a booster station. It needs to be renovated. Town meeting approved some of the design funding last year. So that is in progress. And this money would be the funding that allows us to actually do what the design proposes in terms of the renovation to this station. We have 3 water tanks around the town. These are 2 of them. They're both steel. They need to be painted on the outside and inside. The funding we're asking for is not to do that. That's lots of money, probably to the tune of $3 million if we were to paint inside, outside, and on both tanks. So we're not suggesting we're going to do that right this second. We are asking for money to help us figure out a smart way to do that over the coming years. So some assessment and then potentially some design to do some of that work, not all of it, and then phase it over time. Jump to our sewer. So these are the proposals for sewer. Again, this is similar to the water valves. This has been a recurring request for us. So over 30 stations around the town. Those pictures are just representative of some of the things you'd find in a station. On the left is a series of pumps. On the right is a control panel. So we have big projects, which I'll talk about in just a minute, where we have to bring in a designer and it's multi-million-dollar projects potentially. In this case, there's some work we could do on our own, either with our own staff or just directly hiring a contractor to replace something and then get another 10 or 15 years out of a pump station. And that's what we've been doing. So we call these basically mini rehabs. So this funding, which we've typically done for the past several years, allows us to complete that work. And that indicator on the right, that's not solely based on this funding, but we have seen, based on work we've done to modernize our stations, a reduction in emergency call-ins, which is overtime and potentially emergency work, which costs more money if you have to pay someone to come in at night. not just our own staff, but our contractors. So it's been very successful for us, these mini rehabs. This is a pump station that that will get a full rehab. It's a multi-million-dollar project. 2 years ago, the town funded design for 3 stations. All the stations were designed. 2 of them were funded last year for renovation. So this coming year, we'll be doing those. And then this is the 3rd station. So this funding would allow us to do the renovation on this pump station. And then last bit here is stormwater. So one request for stormwater. These are 3 culverts throughout the town. We have over 200 culverts. They've all been categorized in a report. We have a couple we're working on right now. And then these are 3 that we're looking at as next in line for rehabilitation replacement. So the funding that we're asking for is not going to design all 3 of these culverts. It's going to help us prioritize the work and potentially, depending on how our priority of work, start the design for probably one of them. And then we'd be back in the future for funding to actually do the replacement. So that was the presentation. Again, I'm happy to go back and talk about anything, but I know other people are behind me and you have a timeline, so I just wanted to get through it and go from there.
Thank you. And before I open for questions, I will say Chris has done a phenomenal job over the years of presenting, like organizing the capital. I remember when he started this like 5 or 6 years ago, he inherited some good work, but has turned it into great work. So I've always been grateful that he's going to lay things out. I would say that you could include force majeure as one of your influencers because things always crop up in your business. But does anybody else have specific questions?
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just have a few questions. So with all the changes in the trucks, I mean, new purchases, reduction of the fleet, I'm happy to see that there is, continued reduction and thoughtful purchases with these multi-purpose trucks. I'm just wondering, for instance, when you replace the van with the pickup truck, will there be any degradation of services? Is there anything that you won't be able to do that you can do now with the van?
Not that I can think of. I think it's only going to make things better for access and drivability and other services we can provide to the town beyond just transporting an individual.
Thank you. I think last year we spoke a little bit about looking into potentially sharing some of these trucks with neighboring towns. Have you been thinking about it? And since then, or is it still not a viable option because of the complexities of doing that?
Yeah, there are pieces of equipment that we share with other towns. We just recently purchased a $150,000 drain camera. We have signboards and light sets that are towed, they're trailer mounted. We haven't looked at anything recently, only because not because it's too hard, but because we didn't find the right fit. Because our neighboring towns don't necessarily do things the way, like some towns, like Southborough doesn't have sewer, right? So and Northborough has a mixture of water and sewer that's from NW, like other places. So the systems aren't exactly the same in terms of and so the needs aren't the same for equipment. If we found something where that option would be there, we'd certainly be open to it. And like I mentioned, there's a few things. It's not vehicles, so and they're kind of low dollar items, but we do have things we do share with other towns, but not any trucks, that at least not right now.
Thank you. And two questions. If you could just restate what you said. So the cost of repainting the water tanks, is it $3 million for one or for the 3 of them?
That $3 million it's a total estimate. It's from a consultant, but it's an estimate. But that's for 2 tanks, the 2 tanks that were shown, and that's for inside and outside of the tanks, and some other maintenance, like there's a ladder that needs to be fixed, and some other things. But that's an estimate for the whole package.
So
Yeah, it's not cheap.
not cheap at all, no. And last question about the pump stations. How many are there in town?
32.
32.
Yeah.
And so you're looking into
Sewer pump stations, and then we have a separate number of wells, which are also pump stations.
I'm referring to the one that needs to be refurbished. So that's one of 32.
Yes.
So how many more will need to be going through the same process in the next 5 years or so?
So we have 3, including this one, if it's funded, that would be in the next year or 2 or 3. There's probably, I'd say a handful, maybe 5 or so, half dozen, that would require not immediate. So this is over the course of probably the next 10 years or more. So we have 32 stations, but like I mentioned, several of them are smaller, and we can kind of do some upgrades ourselves. So all 32 don't require, a multi-million-dollar
Right.
rehab. We probably have, I'd say, a handful of like in the future that we'd have to do similarly to the one you talked about.
And how long after the rehab? How long do you think it will be good for? Is there a expected lifetime of that?
Well, the ones we're rehabbing now are from the 70s. So, I would expect we would get a good 30 years at least. A little bit of it. There's not a whole lot of technology in a sewer station, but there is technology there, and so some of that could play in. But otherwise, I would expect a good 30 years out of that station after it's rehabbed.
Great. Thank you very much.
Any other questions?
Hey, Chris, thank you for presenting. I guess my first question is more a general one, perhaps to Christy and John here on finance. Earlier today, Christy, I just thought it'd maybe be helpful if we shared a little bit of the conversation I had with you in regards to the fiscal policy. And we have best practices in our fiscal policy that talk about, the percentages that we use of free cash in the stabilization fund. That does not exist, to my knowledge, in regards to the other enterprise funds that we have. So in the future, I would like to understand, and this is something, future ask perhaps for future capital planning committees, to understand what our best practices should be in context to these different funds. So the reason why it's pertinent here is because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions in some cases, drawing down of those funds. We need to understand if we're within the best practices of the borders of how far we draw those down on any annual basis. So I didn't know if you had any comments you'd like to share as well.
I guess the only comment is that I had mentioned to you that we were talking about how that was missing from the policy. So,
So something that for future perhaps improvement to this process. I guess one question for you, Chris, in regards to stabilization, in regards to the stations, being on the wastewater treatment plant liaison from the board, will these improvements that you're rolling out over time, which makes a lot of sense to me, and it's great to see it happening, will they enable us to better understand? We just went through our wastewater moratorium. We just released earlier this year, understanding that there's better knowledge today than there was a year ago about our wastewater situation. Will these pumping stations allow us consistently across all 32 of them some good data to understand how they're performing? I know that we had a major situation earlier this year with a water leak from one of the water stations. Similarly, I think it's ideal to understand how much flow we're getting out of each one of these stations, because that's directly related to what's called INI, which is infiltration of water into the system. And the wastewater treatment plant has to process all that water, if it's rainwater or used water. So just curious if these improvements will not only obviously update the modernization of the pumping station, but also the technology we can use to better understand what's happening through that pumping station.
So all of the pump stations currently have what's called a SCADA It's an acronym, I forget what it stands for, but it tracks flows for all of our stations. So we have daily monitoring of the flows. We have pretty good visibility now of those flows. The upgrades will make pumps more efficient. So we'd say potentially on electricity. At some point, we might do some upgrades to the SCADA, but that would have to occur across the board. The I&I, these stations help us see I&I. And so, for example, we had a major water leak on the private side, but it occurred along Route 9. And just by way of how the water was leaking and where it was going, it was, we believe, ending up in one of our pump stations, because we saw, once the leak was fixed and we knew generally how much water we were talking about gallons wise, we saw a reduction at a pump station. So we have good visibility through our stations on it. The I&I is going to be addressed through the pipes themselves and the manholes where the water infiltrates.
That's good to hear. I mean, I think it's kind of the weakest link to get 32 stations. Hopefully they're all to a certain level, right? That you and your team can be monitoring that information, so that can I have an idea where there's an overutilization or an over penetration of I&I into the system. So that's good to hear. In regards to the vehicles, you had a slide, one of your earlier slides, that showed it talked about the 11 years. I don't know if you could throw it up on screen real quick here. Yeah, that guy. So average 11 years, industrial standard 7 to 10 years. You have a footnote at the bottom, reduced from 16 over 5 years. So you're saying that the 11 years is a reduction from 16. Is that on all vehicles? Or is that just, I'll say, the power vehicles? There's obviously a difference between a 1-ton pickup truck, an administrative vehicle, and a multi-ton dump truck. So is that a generalization across all of them, or is that specific to one set of vehicles?
It's not specific to a fleet or a type of functional field. It's the whole fleet combined.
Okay.
That average.
Okay. So out of an admin vehicle, we should expect moving forward to have a minimum of 7 to 10 years out of an admin vehicle. Same with a minimum on a dump truck, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, I mean, the industry for an admin is 5 years, but we've gone with 7 to 10, and so for each of those vehicles shown on the screen there, our long-term plan, which we have, that goes out for another 15 years for all these vehicles, based on the type, we've made our own. So like the 1-tons in the top left, we've said 12 years that's our goal. It's 12-year life cycle. We could go 10, we could go 7, but we think 12 is a reasonable approach for us. And so the bigger trucks, we've gone to 15. The sweeper, which is, like, by nature of its job, it takes in a lot of corrosive materials, and so that they just don't last as long. So our number is a little bit lower for them. So for each of those vehicles, we have our own, what we've said our life cycle is, and it's almost all of them are higher than 7 to 10 years. Okay. So it's more on the, I don't know what you'd call that, conservative side or what, but.
Sure. And then you mentioned the lead times on some of the vehicles that have been ordered 2022, I think 23. You're still waiting on some vehicles. Any generalization of what is it build time? Is it just?
It's, it varies. It varies on the type, where it comes from, what's available, in terms of any customization or anything like that. A couple of years ago, I know when there was an increase in steel and some other inflationary things, that had some impacts, but it's kind of unique to the piece of equipment, but the standard we've seen is at least 12 months.
Okay. And then on the 1-ton plow trucks, does it include the plow, or is that just the vehicle? The cost, the price?
The cost includes the vehicle, all our vehicles are outfitted with the radios that are compatible with the police and fire, the plow. There's lighting that has to be installed. Like when you see the yellow flashing lights, those have to be installed after the fact. So the funding we've asked for covers all of that.
All of it. Okay. Thank you. Helpful. Thank you.
Anybody else? I just had a question about the water meters because I know Nat Grid is doing a switch over to wireless water meters. Could you talk about how the funding, because I saw it goes out for about 5 years at like 250,000 a year. What's the intersection of the Nat Grid efforts versus what we're doing as a town and what we're paying for, if you don't mind?
Intersection with National Grid, meaning
So is this a coordinated effort? Are they the same equipment? Are you complementing work that they're doing?
Okay.
Or is it businesses versus residential?
they're completely separate operations, since National Grid does its own thing with electricity and we do our own thing with water. However, if you've seen your meter get replaced, for National Grid, they sent you a letter and it told you what they were doing. They're putting in a smart meter, which means you can now have access to your electricity use kind of on an hourly or daily basis versus, whenever you get your bill every month or whatever. We will be doing the same thing, putting in a smart meter, which will allow the owner of that meter to see, more real-time use. But we're not in any, it's kind of coincidence that they're doing what they're doing. Not coincidence, because lots of people are adjusting to smart meters, but our action is not in any way aligned with National Grid.
So recognizing the electricity and water totally separate, I always guess at some point those installations involve something that involves the ability to transmit data wirelessly.
Yes.
Is there an opportunity to overlap in that regard, or are they literally two separate pieces of equipment?
Yeah, they're two entirely separate pieces of equipment, and they're owned separately, obviously, by National Grid and the town. So, so the intent of what National Grid is doing is the same intent we have in terms of providing more updated real-time information. But that's about the only connection between the two.
Thank you. And the last observation I would have is that when you did start this about 5 or 6 years ago, I do remember you used to have a slide that had the ages of all the different pieces of equipment. And I do remember at the time there was 20 and 30-year-old pieces of equipment, and the effort you were making was very easy to point out that we are targeting these older ones. And I think that that's a helpful visual in terms of what needs to happen, and where I saw one truck that was, I think, 24 years old and a couple of others that were over 15. But I think that was a very helpful visual to reinforce the fact that you are bringing in the age of the equipment, and it was a very effective tool. So just an observation. Thank you. Any other thoughts, feedback? Chris, you covered a lot. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Jenny, I think you're next up for the planning department.
Do you mind if I just add something before Jenny gets started?
Of course.
I just wanted to address some of the comments that were conveyed to this committee via email, just to sort of correct information that you received. There was an email that was received by the chair related to this committee's work and the transportation projects. So since Jenny's about to present on them, I just wanted to mention in August, staff presented a story map. The link to that was included in your email. It's also on the town's website. At the time, we actually immediately followed the presentation of that story map with information about the long-term capital plan, with the intent of those projects coming onto the long-term capital plan, which would be presented in January. January is because, as you know by charter, that's when we have the budget hearing, and that's when I'm required to present the budget and capital plan. So the charter actually requires it by the first meeting in February, but we typically do that in January. In terms of what the development team has been working on, the development team is a working group. We have working groups all the time. It's very common. We have a finance team, also a working group. Everything that happens at the development team, finance team, any working group level is the result of that has been brought and will continue to be brought to committees that have approval authority, so that they're fully discussed publicly and decisions are made by the boards that have that authority. And so as it relates to this committee, I just wanted to say that the other projects which you're going to hear about are new to this committee. I think most of you know that these transportation projects are larger projects. And what we're trying to do is develop this longer term capital plan, which you'll get a full document before that you've completed your work, showing that over the 15-year period. And the purpose of that is to have a planning tool that considers staff capacity, financial stability, creates a clear understanding of available funds as they relate to our comprehensive fiscal management policies, and then creates department and project alignment and transparency. So we're really excited about it. It's something we've been working on for a really long time. I think this committee has been asking for something like that, so I'm happy to bring that. And so as you hear more about these transportation projects, we were working through what this committee's role is in those projects because they typically have a completely different funding source. They're not like what you just heard about from Chris, which is capital requests. It's not requesting any funding from the town. And so so they're in this other project category. And so as you look at the criteria and what the work is of this committee and your sort of scope, they fall outside of that really in terms of criteria because the criteria doesn't really apply. There's no request for town funds, but it's really important for this committee and other committees to understand the bigger picture. So what we're planning to put forward is a presentation of these projects and to hear from you what your questions are, trying to raise awareness, develop understanding, and make sure that you're understanding these larger projects in the scope of the entire capital plan. So, shorter way to say that is I'll be sending out a new. Actually, there's some other tweaks that need to be made to that ratings document, but the ratings don't really apply to these particular projects.
Thank you, Christy. And I think one of the things all of us who work on committees, it's not unusual to be approached. It was great to know that there is a forum where these questions can be answered and where they can be actively pursued. This is not the right forum, but we certainly, if it informs questions you're going to ask, I think that's a helpful thing. But it was really helpful to understand that there is a place where these questions can go. And I hope the citizens know that a little better now. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Jenny.
Jenny Gingras, Director of Planning. And I also have Fred Leonardo here, Community Development Director, and he'll be talking about this first project that's in front of you. So we have 3 projects that are up on the capital plan for fiscal year 27. All of the projects are funded through grants or mitigation funding or Chapter 90 funds. And there's also a project on here that we plan to seek grant funding for, mitigation funding for from a developer. So we thought it would be helpful to go through and just describe each one individually, and then we're happy to answer any questions at the end.
Fred Leonardo, Community Development Director for the town. Thank you for having us tonight. So the first project we're talking about is the Otis Street Corridor project. Some people get this confused as B-Wall Section 1. B-Wall Section 1 is only part of it, a small part of the overall project. This whole project started 4 to 5 years ago. Started with a safety audit, went into a corridor study, and now we've gotten to 100% design, engineering design. The intent is to have it to go out to bid to a contractor within the next couple of weeks. Hopefully issuing a contract comes within bid in the next couple of months with construction hopefully starting this spring. The project encompasses the intersection of Otis and Turnpike. It's the 4 corners on Otis Street, going down Otis Street. It has been phased. The first phase brings you from the intersection all the way down to about 54 Otis Street. 54 is where there's a new building there, but hasn't been fit up here yet. That's 54 phase 1A, we're calling it. Brings you to 50, which is the last building on the right on Otis Street. And then phase 2, which is projected for a couple of years out, goes in front of the Hockomock Pond. So that's the areas it would be. Part of that is a shared use path, in this case, the B-Wall Section 1. But we'd be looking at a shared use path regardless of where the improvements would be in town. So that's a real brief synopsis of that particular project. I'd certainly entertain questions from there.
What is the capital exposure for this town for these projects? Though I realize it's not part of what we're talking about here.
Well, certainly I'll touch on that briefly. So they're all different for each project. This particular project was funded in 4 sources. There's a Mass DOT grant that was for $2.5 million. Mass Works originally was for $2.5 million, and then we got an additional $2 million. And then there was a Complete Streets for $500,000 and opera funding for $250,000. That was the town's contribution, if you will.
Thank you.
What's the expected timeline for this if it starts in spring?
Approximately 2 construction sessions a season. So we would hope to have it completed in 27, I believe. That's the projection at this.
27?
Yes.
Thank you.
Through the construction season of 27.
Thank you.
What are the actual physical improvements? What do they consist of? Could you just describe it verbally to us?
Yeah, sure. So it'd be, for visually, it'd be very similar to Lyman Street. So the Lyman Street Route 9 intersection will look very similar to that. So what the biggest, well, I should say the biggest, it's to increase the turning lanes coming out of Otis Street and into Route 9 and vice versa. The other major improvement we're looking for there is pedestrian crossing. Right now, there's 0 pedestrian crossings, and as Jenny Gingras likes to say, and is true, you have to pray Frogger to go across there. So you take your life into your hands to try to get from what used to be Fountainhead is now Arrive Apartments, the McDonald's, the new Big Y, any of those to try to get across that intersection is impossible from a pedestrian standpoint. So one of the major improvements we're looking to do there is put in controlled crosswalks, to have standing stations that you can actually cross. One part of it will have pedestrian sidewalk, and the other part will have the shared use path. So there'll be ways to get to the different facilities along Otis Street and then back across the McDonald's and to Arrive Apartments. So that's the big improvement with the increased lanes in the turning lanes.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, that's going to be fantastic for the town.
I think it's a huge improvement on that. For the impetus this started with the industrial businesses, specifically the ones that were owned by Atlantic Managements, and they've been our partner in this when we first entered this, and they paid for the engineering on the front end of that. So it's the increased industrial use of Otis Street as well, but it has a huge impact from the pedestrian crossing now too.
So are we also going to add lanes on Otis Street itself or no?
Well, Otis Street does get widened. There's actually, at the Target, if you're familiar with that road, there's a Target driver that comes out. There will be a new street light there, and the lanes will be increased from there, part of the way down Otis Street up to the intersection.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the other vast improvement, is putting a signal at Target.
Are we tracking the improvement in safety to make sure that the changes are working as expected for safety, accidents, injuries, that sort of thing?
Well, I guess we will be. I don't know how we track that until we do it, but that was one of the, I mean, from the safety on it was one of the state's highest traffic incidents, because that's what really was the impetus, the initial safety audit of that area.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little surprised to hear you say I'm not sure how we do it, because I would have thought we track safety in general around the town. No, this is ignorance speaking.
Well, you're really talking to the law department. The police department does have some kind of logs that they track incidents. Same way with the fire department, accident tracking and things like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, the next project that we have is the East Main Street Corridor Project. And these plans in front of you are actually concept plans that we will be presenting at a public information meeting on December 9th. And I do have the flyer in here too, just to put up for the public. But this project is done through, the design is done through mitigation funding, through planning board approved projects, and then also I'm using Chapter 90 funding. And then it is on the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Program, with the state. So the construction will be completely funded through MassDOT. But this project is another shared use path. It'll be between 8 to 10 feet, and it will run along here where the Hastings School is, and it will travel down East Main Street at Flanders Road. There's a proposed signalized intersection, so a light, and then it would continue to travel down past Route 9. You can see it keeps going here. And then it eventually ends at Thomas Newton Drive. So there's multiple crossings being put in, and then a shared use path as well. The shared use path is something that MassDOT is pushing in a lot of projects, rather than a traditional sidewalk, which is about 5 feet or so. They're looking at pushing the shared use path, which can allow bikes, pedestrians, other modes of transportation, so that you don't have the on-street bike lane in addition to the sidewalk. It gets the bicyclist safely off the road. It's similar to a rail trail, as you could say. So that project, again, the design is funded through mitigation funding that we've received through planning board decisions over the past 10 years, and then Chapter 90 funding, and then the construction will be completely funded under the State Transportation Improvement Program. So currently we're in design. This is the concept plan. We'll be finishing up the 25% design in fiscal year 27. And then hopefully we'll be in construction in, I believe it's fiscal year 30.
Any sense of the amount of easement requirements that'll come out of this as it applies to the residents?
We're attempting to not have to obtain any easements. However, it's we don't know yet. So the first step is to talk to the residents, and that's, we invited everyone that's affected, all the abutters, to the public information session. So we'll be talking to them. We have an idea of where the path will go, so we know which properties would be affected, at least in the front of their property. But we're trying our best to stay outside of their property lines and in the right of way as it exists.
Thank you.
Question, 2 questions. Number one, is the roadway itself being studied in terms of its width, potential for turning lanes in and out of that roadway, and then additional stoplights, not that I want to disturb anybody's commute. And then also just, is there a possibility of beautification in terms of street trees along that corridor? There's a huge potential. It's kind of the gateway to our community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of landscaping, that's something the consultant will be looking at. I'm not sure how much room we will have to do that. It depends on the feedback we receive from the public, of course, and then just the width of the right of way. But they do a thorough traffic analysis and roadway analysis before they come up with these plans. So they do look at different concepts, what would fit there, and whether a light is the best option. And so they do a lot of data analysis before they get to this point in recommending what you see up here.
And the timeline? I'm sorry if you said that, I apologize, I missed it.
We're currently in the preliminary design right now, so we have the concept plans. We'll be finishing up the preliminary designers. We sometimes say 25%. The design should be finished by FY28. And then construction, I believe they just told us is on the tip for fiscal year 30.
Thank you.
One more question. Thank you for this presentation. Regarding the area around Hastings, have you been in touch with the school department?
Yes, we have reached out to the school department to let them know that this, we're gathering the public information on it, so they are aware of it.
Okay, because I know that they're looking into improvements in that area, so maybe there could be some synergy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I just wanted to share this on the screen. This is the information for the design public meeting. And then the QR code there is just a link to the planning department page where we have the information on there under our active transportation projects.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jenny, thank you very much for presenting this. It's great to see the work moving forward here on this. A lot of people have had concerns about the Flanders Road intersection for years. So it's good to see that that's being looked at and hopefully addressed. I guess a couple of questions. If you can go back to the section of road near McDonald's down there, just curious, I guess we don't see it. It breaks off. Is the intention that the shared use path on the north side of the Route 30 there would go under the bridge?
I believe they're still evaluating whether we have enough room under the bridge to actually continue the shared use path, or it could be just, it turns into a narrower sidewalk, maybe 5 feet in width, and then have an on-road bike lane for that transition. But it is narrower than the road under there, so it is a tricky design.
Yeah, it is a tricky spot. And that brings me to the next question. When we talk about shared use paths, are you anticipating that it'll be, I mean, I think I've written on a lot of shared use paths around the state, and most of them are lined, and you know they have a lot of signage in regards to what can and cannot be on that path. Do you anticipate that this area would be an area that bikes and e-bikes would be allowed to be off the road, or as the shared use kind of implies? Or I guess talk a little bit about when you say shared use, what will that look like? What will that mean as far as the different types of transportations?
It would be similar to other shared use paths in the state that you see. I know there's limitations on e-bikes and the speeds that you can go. So it would be similar to that, but bikes, pedestrians would be allowed on there. And I assume it would be striped similar to the other paths.
I love the idea that this connects a lot of different, I'll say, large occupancy communities, a little more walking flexibility into the downtown area. So it's, again, great to see that. Just a question on the upper section of that, across to the left of the intersection of Flanders Road, you have a white X box there. I was initially thinking that was a parking space, but I'm assuming it's a turning radius issue. Is that why that's a no for no
I
car?
believe there's a driveway there, so it's so that
So no block the driveway.
Right.
Okay, so similar to what's in front of the fire station, just knowing
Correct.
people that they can't block
Yep.
that access. Okay, great. I look forward to the sessions and learning more about it. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the last project, and it's definitely still in conceptual, even pre-conceptual phasing, but I just wanted to talk about it and we wanted to make sure it was on here. So the Milk Street area, particularly the area with Route 9, has been an issue over the past few years, just with really the cloverleaf. And then there's also an area in front of the Ocean State job lot where there's a hump over there. So it's hard for cars to get out of there, and then turning left out of that Ocean State job lot area can be difficult. So we do have a developer coming in front of the planning board that is proposing a development at the corner of Route 9 and Milk Street, right here, and then also right here. So one of the things that we are talking to them about, and of course this has to be approved by the planning board, is mitigation, which is very typical that the planning board asks for mitigation towards transportation projects, housing, things like that. So one of the things that we're asking for from this developer is to contribute to do a Milk Street corridor study. It would be similar to what we asked for Amazon, what Amazon did for Otis Street, so that we understand the issues with the intersection. and what can be done to remedy them, and then give recommendations on those improvements. These are MassDOT roads, so they review the developer's projects, they review any project that is along this stretch on Milk Street or Route 9. So they have to approve any driveway openings, things like that. And we would want MassDOT to fund and do the project, at least how it pertains to the cloverleaf. But then there's also a part of this where it could mean that we get a shared use path down Milk Street potentially, but that would be done by partnering with this developer through a MassWorks grant, which they would pay for the design of that. And then it could potentially be funded under the TIP or through other MassWorks funding. So there's lots to it. I don't have a lot of answers on what it will look like until we see that study, but it's just something that the planning board has identified as a need through other projects. They talked about it when they approved the MA restoration project and other projects in that area.
Any questions?
Just glad to see this on the radar. Thank you.
May I ask? Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to ask, the idea for a plan there, is it a residential plan or is it a professional plan? Do we know?
It's a multifamily proposal for the
Okay.
development.
Multifamily, okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
How many students do you anticipate? How many kids do you anticipate in?
The developer said in their analysis, we asked for an impact analysis as part of it, 20 school children total. Their units that they're proposing are typically for a single or two people. They're higher end units, and in the studies and other apartment complexes they have in other areas of the state, they don't see a huge impact of school children.
I don't know if this is a appropriate forum for that, but I think it would be good to get a second opinion on that estimate, because that sounds, to me, sounds highly unlikely that there will be only 20 kids out of that.
It's in line with a lot of studies that we've seen come through with declining enrollment, and then the state through other planning agencies has done other studies as well. But in the application, a lot of information is included in links to other studies, so I would recommend taking a look at those as well.
Okay, I'll contact you. Thank you.
And I'd imagine that affordable housing and all those things are still going to be dependent upon what comes out of sort of the early studies. So I'm good. I'm glad you're asking the question.
One of the things also to bear in mind when you look at the housing is the size of the units and the room count. So even in our town, the more recent construction has less kids than some of the older construction where units might be bigger. Focusing on 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms makes a big difference. I mean, if you look at the property over at Bay State Commons, those units are designed very differently than those units over at Arrive. So taking that into context a little bit sort of hopefully can cause people to look at it a little differently than what they normally generalize would come out depending on the design. So, look at the designs relative to what it resulted in kids.
Just a follow-up question. What's the status of the Rotary study?
We are going to be presenting to the select board on December 2nd with the concept and getting feedback from the select board, and then it will then go to the planning board on December 16th for additional comments and guidance for how we're moving forward.
Christy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes. Sorry. I was just going to say that the quarter study, in terms of the planning, is on the capital plan for fiscal 29 and 31, the Rotary project. But what I did want to add is that I think that we hear a lot of concern sometimes about when we get these grants, there's a requirement often for matching funds. If we were to seek matching funds from the town, then those projects would come back to this committee so that you could look at it in the context of the other capital projects that are being proposed. So the ones that they've just talked about are currently not asking for any town funds, but if something were to change, it would certainly come back to this committee as we look at it against the other projects.
Thank you. Any other questions? I guess the question I'd have, my last question would be, all of these obviously are driven by the state, like I guess largely they're paying for this stuff. Do we have line of sight to what their plans are and how they're prioritizing this, just so that we can respond appropriately for where we may want to invest as a town?
We do keep in contact with MassDOT on these different projects to try to, push them forward if we see them as a priority. But they are aware of the different projects. I mean, the East Main Street is on the tip, so that's something that they would be doing. This would probably end up being a similar thing. It would end up on the Transportation Improvement Program, so it would be on their list that way.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
It doesn't sound like any of these are sneaking up on us, so.
No.
And more to the point, we'd see more stuff, if we wanted to develop areas of this. Bewell, for example, we know what's going to be happening and we know there's changes and we can respond appropriately.
Right, yes. Typically, the state would notify us if they're doing a project and what that looks like. We have another project, for example, on Fisher Street, which is through the Safe Routes to School project, and that's completely funded by MassDOT. So the state is funding that, but they are keeping us in the loop and we're involved in that project. But that funding has nothing to do with the town.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else? Jenny, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to share? Next, I see community development. Fred?
Community development is really the conservation part of it, and that's part of the community development overall. Our department, I don't want to steal a lot of Jen Miller's thunder because she's going to give you a presentation on that, but what she's really looking for, what we're looking for as part of that conservation area is that, as you're probably all aware, we keep acquiring more and more conservation open space in town. We really need to develop a real developed plan on how we actually maintain that. And Jen will talk to that. Again, I don't want to steal any of her thunder, but that's the premise of what we're looking for capital improvement there.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Fred.
Need the mic just a little bit lower than Fred. But thank you all. Jennifer Miller, Conservation Director. I have just a few slides I'm going to run through, and if you want to ask questions along the way, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer them at the end. But I just want to give a little bit of context and background to exactly what the land management plans are and land stewardship, because this isn't necessarily something that you all are seeing on a regular basis, like the transportation projects. So similar to Jen Kirkland's presentation earlier, where she was talking about the recreation areas and going through the process of feasibility study, the land management plans are quite similar to that, but for conservation areas instead of recreation areas. So I've included a couple of graphics, and unfortunately the lighting doesn't make it super easy to see, but on the upper graphic, it's a map it's a few years old from the Westborough Community Land Trust's website for the charm bracelet, but it really does a nice job of highlighting all of the green or open space areas in town. And it's important to understand that not all of these are town-owned recreation or open space areas. Some of them are state-owned, so through DCR and other agencies for the state. Some of them are owned by the Westborough Community Land Trust, and some are owned by Sudbury Valley trustees. I'm sure there's a handful of other groups in there as well. But those are the main landowners in addition to the town. And then the table below kind of highlights those that are specifically owned by the town and their acreage within the charm bracelet. And then there are some properties that fall outside of the charm bracelet as well. And then just within all of those open space areas, including those outside of what the town owns, we have a total of 50 miles of trail. The lion's share of that is on the town-owned parcels. Westborough, as a community, has done a fantastic job, especially in working with WCLT, of providing public access within those open space areas. I've worked in other towns where that hasn't been the case. There's been a lot of open space acquisition, but not necessarily public access that's gone along with that. And so I think that should be applauded and recognized. So a lot of times when we talk about land stewardship, we focus on those aspects, the public access and the passive recreation, which is the trails, the staging areas, and talk about the infrastructure. So I've been before you all before, kind of trying to sound the horns for the need for some addressing some of the deferred maintenance of our aging infrastructure in our conservation areas, whether it be bridges where handrails are falling apart or the structures are deteriorating, collapsing. We have wooden staircases that are deteriorating as well, and exposed rebars you can see in that picture. And then some of our parking areas or staging areas also need upgrades to provide public access, like you can see in this picture, which is Bowman Conservation Area, where there's a designated ADA parking spot with all the proper striping and signage, a paved pathway that takes you not only to the nearby bridge that was recently done, but also to the pavilion. So just all important considerations. That's part of what we mean when we talk about land stewardship and kind of, I think, what people expect we're talking about. But the other side of that are some aspects that you might not think of when we talk about land stewardship. So what other benefits and uses do these conservation areas supply for residents and visitors, and also on a regional level? So things like water supply protection. If we have drought over the last couple of summers, it's become readily apparent that protecting our open space areas and providing for some water supply protection is really important. And then on the opposite end of that, flood protection. As we see more intense rain events and the frequency and duration of those rain events, flood protection, our low-lying wetland areas within those conservation areas is also very important. Carbon sequestration, increased property values, enhancing biodiversity, habitat preservation, and then preservation of community character too. So that's a little bit of a background on what I mean when I'm talking about land stewardship broadly, all of those things. And then if we look specifically at what is a land management plan, it's a little bit different than a baseline survey, which is typically something that town or another entity like Sudbury Valley trustees would do when we first acquire a property. And that's kind of like its existing conditions. What does the property currently have on it for natural resources? Are there existing trails? What's there when we acquire it? Land management plan goes a little bit further than that. It serves as a roadmap for property stewardship that, together with the baseline survey info, explores our community goals. So there's a community input process, community outreach, potential opportunities, and possible threats. And when we talk about threats, it's things like invasive species, drought conditions, changing habitats through climate change. All of those are what we mean when we talk about threats. Evaluating the unique importance of each of our open space areas and providing community benefits. Again, going back to the passive recreation, water supply protection, all those different values. Outlining management recommendations to best protect and enhance our community benefits. So that's trail maintenance needs, invasive plant controls, and establishing those community priorities and estimated costs. I think that's probably, that last point is where we'll see the most benefit here in Westborough. Again, we've done a really great job of providing community access, but sometimes we've forgotten about how do we continue to provide those resources and those assets in a safe and effective way, because they need maintenance and replacement over time, and we need to budget for that and plan for it. And then also, how do we protect those other values? So things like the flood protection, ensuring that our forests are maintained and protected against different species that can impact the integrity and the health of our forests and other ecosystems. And then just to touch on why they're important. So the LMPs allow for the community to help set the priorities for each conservation area. And I think that's really important. If I look at my role here in town, I've done a lot of work in other communities with LMPs, but, if you look at Westborough over the last 5 years, there have been 3 or 4 different people in my role. And so with each of us, we could come in with a different outlook and priorities for each of these resource areas. But if you have the community set the priorities, then those plans, like Jen Kirkland had mentioned earlier for the recreation areas, those plans are meant to be at least a decade-long outlook of what are the priorities for the community for these resource areas or for these conservation areas versus how I might look at it and how I might approach it. And then reinforcing the goals and the actions in other town documents, such as the master plan, the open space and recreation plan, and the capital plan. Forecasting upcoming needs and priorities enables the town to plan for both ongoing annual budgets, so that's our regular budget cycle, and then one-time capital expenses in a way that's fiscally prudent, viable, and it avoids expensive deferred maintenance and replacements. Is kind of where we are right now, where we're constantly trying to keep up with failing structures. And then maximizing the opportunity to explore alternative funding sources. So if we can plan ahead, then we can really take advantage of alternative funding sources too, like community preservation funds and grant funding that's out there. And then just taking a look at our master plan. So there are specific goals within the master plan that speak to these land management plans, and just ensuring that we're keeping in mind those goals and actions. So under the open space and recreation, the goal number 1 and action 5 is to prepare land management plans for the town's existing open space and conservation lands. So that's pretty clear cut and straightforward that we're in alignment with that, with this proposal. And then under the natural, cultural, and historic goals, it's again, goal number 1, action 1 is to improve the town's land management planning for its conservation areas. And action 5 is to protect, enhance, and increase the town's natural systems. And so I think, again, those definitely align with moving forward with land management plans. I've reached out to an agency that I feel has done a really good job here in Massachusetts, or consulting firm called The Collaborative, of putting together proposals for groups like the Audubon and managing their open space areas. They put together a proposal that covers a lot of the information that I talked about earlier, as far as providing basic background info for each of our areas, looking at the goals for use and management, best practices for primary land uses, stewardship recommendations, estimated annual budget, and capital projects, prioritized actions, and a recommended schedule for maintenance. Their proposal includes public outreach, which I think is a really important piece of this. Again, the community should be guiding the document with their priorities and needs. So public input would be captured at the beginning for the kickoff, and then again towards the end of the project when we're reviewing the draft reports. The estimated cost to do the land management plans for all of our conservation areas is $90,000. And again, that's one proposal just to kind of get us in the ballpark of what we can expect for this. And then we would obviously solicit other proposals as well. I think that's it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Happy to give them. Anybody?
Yeah, I always have questions. Thank you for the presentation. I just have a few questions about the bracelet, charm bracelet trails. I think they're a wonderful asset of our town. I don't think we do it. Well, in my subjective perspective, I don't think we're doing enough justice to actually advertise them to the residents. I find them, I just looked at the maps that we have online. They're not easy to follow. There are no, clear directions where to park the car. Like what to look for on the trail. Can we improve that? Exposure to those trails to the residents. Maybe send out updated maps. With the weekly paper. Are you tracking the usage of these trails in any way?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at the first couple of questions. And it's almost like I paid you to say that. No, so I agree completely. Like it's fantastic that Westborough has all this access to these open space areas, whether they're town-owned or not. Because from a trail user perspective, if you're out there hiking a trail, it doesn't matter to you who owns it. You just want to enjoy that trail, right? It doesn't matter if it's the state or the town, but on our town-owned properties, we definitely have a responsibility to make sure people can easily navigate the trails, and that there's clear signage for trailblazing, that the maps are easy to access, whether you're going to the kiosk there at each facility or you want to pull up a map online. So that's something that we've been working on over the last couple of years with WCLT and also with our amazing IT analyst and our in the IT department. Pam's fantastic, and our department has been working with her a lot on developing new maps. So that includes color-coded blazing. We've started at our most frequently used conservation areas, working with WCLT on that, and our senior volunteers. And then we should have new maps that coincide with that color-coded blazing, and those will all be uploaded online so that they're available.
Great. And now,
Yes.
as far as usage, are you able to track the usage of the trails in any way?
You can definitely track usage. I've worked for other agencies where that's a big part of our annual or monthly reporting. They make sensors that operate much like a trail camera, where just every time that this signal is broken, it counts as a person going through it. And they can make them much more involved so that they know if it's a person, a horse, or a bike. But in our case, we're probably looking mostly at pedestrian access. So we can do that, but we haven't done it yet that I know of.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, one idea I have is, at some point I participated in the geocaching challenge with the Cub Scouts, and I thought that was an excellent way to actually encourage residents to. I happen to find all kinds of trails I didn't even know existed, and I live here for many years. So maybe that's something that you could be looking into. Make it kind of a fun challenge. That way people can go to different parts of town and explore these trails.
Geocaching is a lot of fun. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. So quick question overall regarding budget. If recommendations come out of this, like, buy a mower and mow the field so people can walk their dogs or whatever. So how are we paying for the mower, and where's that coming from?
Well, I'll say that. So within the community development budget, there is some funding for equipment, but not a lot of funding. And that money is also used for other things that we already know about that wouldn't come out of the recommendation. If there was a need for any sort of capital project, we would expect to see it come back through this exact same process. Or I think Jen has mentioned that there are grants available potentially that she would try to target based on the recommendations, but I don't know if you want to add anything.
So part of what, this is the first step to getting to where we can decipher what needs to be increased in our operating budget as opposed to what may be a capital expenditure. So to define the capital expenditure is $25,000, right? But there's many things that may have to happen that we don't actually look at capital expenditures. It may be in the operating budget. So from our perspective, we've been requesting for increase to the operating budget, but we've never been able to really say why. So this is the first step that Jen can now go back through community development and say, this is why we need an increase to our operating budget, because we don't have enough to fund all the mowing. Jen has bought equipment, so and she's worked valiantly with the different community groups, Westborough Land Trust, Sudbury Valley, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts. She has taken times on weekends to have volunteers come in and paint things and do things like that. So we have started to buy equipment. We've never gotten a defined plan, and this is the first step to get to that, so that we have reason why we're either asking for an increase to our operating budget or for a capital expenditure. So without this step, we've been guessing. We need to get away from that.
So if it's an ongoing, if they say, you really should mow this portion of trail every year or something, right. So ongoing obviously would be operational. If it's something that's under 25,000 that doesn't really qualify for this process, right. The department heads use in their budget requests, we call them program improvement requests. And so if Jen says I need, a mower this year that's $5,000, I'm making it up, that can be a one-time budget expense that we track, we show separately within the budget, and then it would come out the following year.
A lot of this has been the acquisition of property over time, right? We just acquired the Ellis Walker property. As we keep adding these properties to our land mass, we haven't, that's a lot of times that's my fault. We haven't accounted to what we're going to do with that once we acquire them. How are we going to maintain those properties? And as Jen has alluded to, that all these properties are open to the citizens of Westborough. We don't close them off. So we have a tremendous trail system. We have a lot of open space. We have to now scientifically define how we're going to maintain those. So that's really the impetus why we're here tonight.
I think that's great. I actually lead volunteer hikes for the Appalachian Mountain Club, and I've done it locally, and concern about ticks is a large concern. There's also often poison ivy right at the trail entrance where the sunshine hits. Also, weeds tend to grow in as well before the forest starts, like behind the golf course maintenance shed is a trailhead. And I called that into Westborough Community Land Trust because it was unapproachable. You couldn't get through it without being concerned you'd be covered with ticks. So there's just, it's not huge, but the areas that do lead into the reservoir paths, like that's where mower starts to be like, you need like a really robust mower. And maybe anyway, your consultant will obviously figure out what needs to be done. But it's a huge opportunity for recreation for this town. So I'm glad you're doing this.
Yeah, and the other thing that Jen appropriately touched on is the access. So people don't quite understand some of this, but with accessibility, anytime we replace or upgrade part of the trail or any access, it has to be accessible. So people don't quite understand that you might have a 2-mile trail and only a portion of that is acceptable, meaning that somebody with some kind of disability, whether it be a walker, a wheelchair, cane, whatever the disability may be, when we replace that item, it has to meet those standards. So that actually elevates the cost of that replacement. So that albeit somebody may not be able to enjoy the whole trail, they at least can get to a part of it, and the part they get and that is replaced has to meet that standard. That costs a lot of money to do that. Those are not inexpensive upgrades. And every time Jen touches the trail or anything to do with that, that's the standard she's held to. And that's the state, they've made that clear that that's the standard they're also looking for when we use any of their grant monies or we use our own money, the town monies. So, that's a misconception a lot of people have also.
Sorry, that's a huge exception. So there are various definitions of accessibility, including, full wheelchair usage, as well as, people who have limited mobility but may use walking assistance, right? So is there a strict definition that that the state is requiring you to stick by for accessibility?
So I would say generally when we are making improvements that are within close proximity to, say, a accessible parking area or a parking area that we know we want to offer some accessibility at in the future, we want to go to that kind of highest standard possible. Sure. And, we understand that as we make some of these upgrades, maybe the trail approach or maybe after that improvement, whatever it is, bridge, stairs, whatever, obviously stairs, wheelchairs not getting upstairs, right, or downstairs. Right. But by providing a handrail or making sure that the step platform and the height are at a universal one, we're making it more accessible to more people. And that's generally our approach, is to make it as accessible as possible.
That's great.
Without it being like, we're not going to put an escalator in.
Yeah, I'm glad that you guys, it sounds like you guys are negotiating that well. That sounds
Like
great.
So to Jen's point, like the accessibility of stairs, people don't understand that people with visual impairments, it's important that the stairs are uniform to certain heights and depths. Same way with the handrails. It's not just for, everybody defers to or goes right to a wheelchair. There's other types of disabilities that also will access those areas.
Any other questions? So Jen, I would say that one of the things, and Fred, I appreciate you've already alluded to this. One of the things that I will never let get by me, so long as the AFC will continue to have me, is the fact that we should be doing land planning for any new acquisition of land we have, because we've never identified the capital elements of a property before we bought it and made sure we held that to a strict standard of planning, cost, that sort of thing. So I think that should be part of what we do as a town before we buy a land, just because it should be written into the manual of what we do. But I'll go a little further, and if I may ask, and I hope I didn't misunderstand you. You referenced the $90,000 study being for all of our conservation land, which I presume is around the 50 miles of trail and stuff. But then you said, but then we can do more. Do you mean more studies? Do you mean, like, what is this 90,000 getting us that we're not getting all the way for? If I may.
The 90,000 is for all of our conservation areas that the town currently has.
Okay.
So includes the newest acquisitions like Ellis Walker. So Sudbury Valley trustees for that particular property, Ellis Walker, Sudbury Valley trustees will hold the conservation restriction. And so they're actually doing the baseline survey for that. That's something that in the past the town has paid to complete. So again, that's just existing conditions. If you're thinking of like the typical project in town, when they submit a plan set, the very first page is usually existing conditions, what's there currently. And then the other pages in that plan set typically delve into how they want to develop the site, whether, it's putting up a new building, whatever it is. And so we take that same approach with the land management plan. It's, are we going to have public access? What is that going to look like? Is there going to be a parking area? Or multiple parking areas? Are going to be trailheads within nearby developments? How many miles of trail are we looking at? Are there invasive species that need to be managed to protect water supply or to offer greater flood protection, habitat restoration projects? All of those things come into play. And so the land management plans will not only cover the public access component, but it will also make recommendations and evaluate things like field management. So areas, if there are meadows that need to be mowed or maintained as opened, not only for public access, but also for ecological purposes. So meadows are really important for a lot of different ecological purposes. And if you don't maintain them, they're going to transition into forests.
So what are we not getting? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. So what was trailed off at the end there about what we may spend more on later that wouldn't be covered by this 90, or may have just been that I was reading into what you were saying? No, this 90,000 will get us a full on everything we need, estimates of the capital, future capital planning and
Yes.
other services. Okay.
Yeah, it's everything, soup to nuts.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Are you going to talk about the bridge as well in a second? So I don't want to jump ahead.
The bridge.
The bridge
we
replacement.
That's not going to be requested as part of a capital
Okay.
request because we received word that it's going to be funded through a state earmark.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Congratulations.
We can afford it. Thank you.
Good news, yes.
It is good news. And I suppose what we will also then see, because this is 2027, if this study takes a whole year to do, approximately, we're not talking 2028, the services you were talking about, the shortcomings you were talking about that needed to be upgraded, those aren't going to be touched for 2-3 years. And that sort of concerns me because I don't see any other addressing of those infrastructure, for lack of a better terms,
Yeah,
topics. So
We do have one request in with, for CPC funding or CPA funds for some of the infrastructure that's deteriorating and in need of replacement for Bowman conservation areas. So it specifically looks at Bowman because that's one of our most heavily used areas. And so we prioritized that one and put together a request for that for some infrastructure replacement. And so that's looking more at the stairways. There are several staircases at Bowman. Some of those are being tackled through Eagle Scouts in the near future or have been recently done, but the ones that aren't are part of that proposal, and then adding handrails to all of them, again, for that ADA component.
thank you. My concluding thought on this would be, you talked about the sensors that would allow to track use. As we start thinking about the $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 investments that we may need to make and where best to use them, that would be a fantastic use of something to be placing in different high-use places around the town, so we know which ones are being used more and by how many people. So just a recommendation that we start using that sort of feedback. I don't know if you have the equipment or if it needs to be rented, but it's worth it so that we have a better handle on where people are using things in the town, because that'll draw prioritization.
I think that's a great recommendation. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Allison, you've been very patient. Thank you so much. Let her run over? What? Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't got it. Yeah. I haven't thrown her out. Were you going to?
I'm just saying.
Okay.
Agenda says 6 to 8.
We got our sleeping bags, Allison.
I was going to bring snacks, but I was frowned upon. Considered awful. All right, let's see here. Is it here? Let's see. Oh, like that. Okay. Try this too. My fancy thing works here. Okay. So I'm here to talk about some big projects this year in much larger scale than last year. And I want to first of all express some gratitude to our colleagues on the town side. I think we've engaged in a process of really trying to work in partnership to look at kind of where things fall, how they fall, and try and be very open and transparent about what is coming down the pike so that the community knows what to expect. So I'm kind of starting off this with our biggest sort of request for the year, which has to do with the high school roof. This has been on that capital plan and kind of in people's mind for a while, but we have reached a critical phase with that one part of that roof, and I want to really emphasize that. I am happy to share the report from the engineers from our architecture firm that did the scan of this roof and did the investigation. It's lengthy, but it does indicate the need for some very immediate action on this particular item. The overall scope of the entire kind of combined roof projects at the high school is estimated at 7.7 million, but we actually think we can break that down and tackle different things at different times. So I'm going to kind of walk through that. So really, there are three distinct parts to the roof issue that we're talking about. First is the A and B wing, and this is the oldest section of roof. It's the original 1968 building, so it's a 57-year-old roof, which is a very, very old roof. And the issue is it's in very poor condition, and it's a risk factor for us right now. This is the thing that does keep me up at night a little bit. The phrase from the report that stood out in my mind was that there's parts of the roof that are sort of peeling up that create an uplift risk during high wind events. So that was the one that, it's resonating in my brain. So this is our real immediate need to do a total replacement of this roof. You can see here it's a big project. Our hope is to go out very aggressively and be able to do the work this summer. In the meantime, we have built in for this year a little contingency to make sure we have money for repair if needed. If this were not to pass, we would have to kind of up that amount in subsequent years and just do a lot of holding our breath. The second part is less dire by a long shot. So the C wing of the high school, the consultants have recommended renovation, which is a process that you've heard about before, most notably with Mill Pond. And it is a process that extends the life of the roof considerably. It does it with kind of less strain. And importantly, from our perspective, it is a possibility that allows us to engage with the MSBA and possibly get some reimbursement for that roof project because of the timeline. And then the third part of the high school roof is the roof rim, which is in need of urgent repair as well. And so there's a recommended process for that, which involves kind of fixing the little bits that are broken and then sealing it for future kind of maintenance and prevention. So three distinct parts of this process. A and B wing, the C wing, and then the rim repair. We've been told that bundling the rim and the A and B wing makes the most sense in terms of the way the work has to play out because of where they're located. I want to bring up Mill Pond roof as well. So a couple years ago, I believe at the 2024, there was an attempt to pass this, and it did not go. It was put on the warrant again in 25, but then pulled. But interestingly, we believe it's still viable for restoration, and there's going to be a short window during which it's still viable. And we think that window actually corresponds to the MSBA's requirement that it hit, we think, 25 years. Is that correct? So they won't even do restoration unless the roof hits 25 years. So the way this timing falls is actually almost perfect for this type of project. Just to give you a sense of what that means, I'll kind of get to that in a later slide, but the MSBA would partner with the district for their accelerated repair program, and we'd be able to have about, right now, the reimbursement rate is 49.19%. So that's a good chunk of change back if we were able to get in on that program. I'll walk through the details of that in a second. So Mill Pond is starting to show some wear and tear. There's wet insulation, there's some punctures, there is leaking happening, so we are having to expend money on roof kind of patching and repair right now. But it is not yet at the total replacement threshold. It is still viable for renovation. So this is kind of the plan broken down. Phase one is that A and B roof and rim repair. We're going to request funding for the town and move very quickly. We're hoping to have a real quote in hand for a town meeting and to be able to move and get that project done this summer. Phase two, we would also be going to town meeting this year to request authorization to borrow, but we would not need to borrow for a couple years out. So the idea is we would bundle together the C-Wing restoration and the Mill Pond restoration projects. We would apply for MSBA in January of 27, which is the next time that window opens. And then if we're accepted into that program, the likelihood would be we would begin as early as the summer of 28. So the borrow for this would hit either in FY 28 or FY 29. So in terms of the actual dollar amounts. The authorization needs to be this year, though, in order to be invited into the MSBA program, which is why we're putting it before you today. So again, advantages of restoration are cost savings. It is less than half of the price of replacement. We're doing it earlier than we would do a full replacement, but it extends the life of the roof by about 20 years at least. It's a relatively quick and efficient process, and it actually will allow us to kind of move quickly and I'm sorry, I'm a little tired, and actually minimize any of the waste of the kind of full-blown process. Okay. And MSBA I've already talked about a little bit. So first of all, the financial reimbursement is important. This process is much faster. If you're familiar with their school building project, their core project, that is very long. It usually takes 6, 7, sometimes even 8 years. This is usually within 24 months of the initial application, and sometimes even faster. And, you know, in the MSBA, working with them, they have vendors that are already sort of vetted. They have a lot of experience doing this work. They have supported renovations so far. And, you know, by bundling together, we have an opportunity to actually kind of get reimbursed for 2 projects, kind of, which is a nice advantage to taking this approach. Okay, and that's sort of a summary. So again, if we could authorize the borrow at this year's town meeting, we'd be looking to apply in 27, and again, to have the restoration take place probably starting in 28 at the earliest. So I want to address this smaller project. So you know we've got the larger roof projects. We have an issue with the Gibbons Fieldhouse roof. If you've been over in this compound, it's the little building that sits in the parking lot that's back behind Gibbons and Armstrong. And I think it once had a more robust purpose. Right now it's used almost entirely for storage. And the roof is coming down. It's in very, very bad shape there. And it's a kind of project that has been kicked down the road a few times. We've looked at it seriously. We've thought about a number of different options, including a replacement of the roof. We really believe at this point that demolition is the best option for this project. Repair of the roof and the decking alone would be in the order of magnitude $160,000. And that doesn't include any electrical or plumbing that are internal to that little building. That could escalate it up to over $200,000. For $125,000, we could bring it down and create parking and also invest in a small short-term storage unit that we put, not like a box, but like a shed, basically to protect some of the equipment that is in there. Currently, the equipment that is being stored, it's primarily maintenance equipment, snow removal equipment, and there's some like old drama stuff, so stuff from the performing arts department, like set design and things like that. We have looked at it. We believe we can disperse most of that with a small, like I said, a small shed on site, not where it currently is located, but off to the side. We're thinking about that as a short-term solution for that storage because we are in the process of starting to talk about longer term. What do we want to do in terms of our kind of maintenance and facilities and grounds? And I think those are places where we're thinking about, in the long run, either repurposing a space, building something, sharing a space, for keeping that equipment, including, vehicle maintenance equipment. It is an area where, the select board and certainly the school committee and some other groups have mentioned, are there opportunities for us to gain efficiencies by partnering more effectively with the town? We would like to have those conversations, but we need to kind of solve the immediate problem of making sure this stuff is kept safe and keeping the roof from caving in the short term. So that's a little bit about this small project.
May I just very quickly ask,
Sure.
you said it was 125, that's
Yes.
tear it down plus put up a parking lot plus put up a building?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not it's a small space that would be paved over
Sure.
the park. And we're talking about a small sort of off the lot, like wood storage shed just to keep those things out of the snow.
Thank you.
You're
Just
welcome.
want to make sure that wasn't an up and in cost. Thank you.
So those are it. That's my fast summary of a few projects, and happy to answer questions, and Anita's here to help me. Thank you.
Questions? Okay.
What's the potential damage to the high school if the roof were not repaired? Either the A and B wing or the A and B and C wing?
Right. The A and B wing, I think it's very concerning. When we met with the engineers, they basically said this sort of fly-off option, having the roof actually sort of peel off in part, has happened in a nearby community. I can't remember if it was Northborough or Southborough, but it has the implication of being kind of major damage inside the building. HVAC units, it could be significant if we don't take care of it soon. So, and I'm concerned about safety, obviously, as well.
When was the C-Wing built?
C-Wing is from 2000 and something. I'll have to look that one up. But it's,
Early 2000s.
yeah, 2002, 2001. That's right around the same time as Mill Pond, and that's why those roofs are about the same age.
So I think I'm really excited to see that your architect put together a great study.
Yes.
And I've read through it. I'm a licensed architect, and I think you know that.
Yeah.
So I'm very happy with the recommendation that they've put together. It looks excellent. It looks like they've completely gone through every possible option.
Yes.
The modified bitumen roof, the 2-ply. I mean, it's the right system. Complete tear off, repair that concrete surface.
Yes.
And then put the new roof on. I'm just so thrilled that is the way you guys are leaning for that. Yeah. And furthermore, I think they've done a great study of all the options for what you guys are calling the rim, which, and if you look at the detailed drawings that were provided to us, that rim is like 2'9" to 3'6" high. Like that is an enormous, it's up there, like it's far away, but it's a huge amount of concrete, right? And so the best practice in restoring modern period buildings is actually to repair concrete, but just leave it as concrete.
Yes.
Unless you were overcladding the entire building with metal, then you would maybe put metal on it. So I'm really excited that you guys have come up with what is considered to be a best practice. So I'm excited about that. As far as the C wing, I guess I just wanted to ask, I noticed that there's some fasteners that are popping up throughout that EPDM roof as a finding. So the fasteners are basically imagine you have a sheet of 4x8 plywood, right? So there would be maybe like 8 or 10 fasteners in one of those sheets. Maybe that's maybe a lot. It's at least 4 or 5 or 6. So if those are popping up and that's what's holding the insulation and the more thick insulation, which is called coverboard, down to the either metal or concrete below, and they're popping up, I don't understand why an over roofing is considered an acceptable option. It seems like you have to refasten that entire roof. So I'd like the architects to look into that. I mean, it seems like they should look into that. That seems to be a miss. I noticed that they're pulling out a lot of the wet areas, or proposing to pull out a lot of the wet areas, which makes sense. But these other areas where the fasteners, which seems to be predominant, like throughout everything that they're popping up, that doesn't make sense. So, I mean, most of the clients I work with, public clients throughout Massachusetts, just do a tear off. Like they just completely rip it off and put a new roof down. So I don't know. I think like a 20 to 30 year warranty is what roof manufacturers give. The expectation is you put a new roof on in 20 or 30 years. Or maybe you try to get an additional 5 years out of it and then you put a new roof on, right? That's just, I know we're all trying to be conservative, but like 20 to 30 years is how long a roof lasts. And then you just tear it off and put a new roof on. So if you guys do end up going the route of the overcoating, I just want to make sure that your architect is doing a non-proprietary specification so that we get multiple bids. Is that what's planned?
I think, and additionally, I want to say, they have indicated that they believe that is viable now. As that timeline rolls, we would have to they'll have to do a rescan, make sure that it is in fact the viable solution and that's a little bit of the trick of the MSBA is if we get in there in that program and the situation changes, we may have to change course in terms of the type of solution that we come up with. But I appreciate just the question, and we can follow up with GRLA. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the presentation, Allison. Always great to see these things come forward on the school side. I guess in no particular order, educate me a little bit. I look at the list of the 4 different projects here. 2 of them have been identified as MSBA candidates, for lack of a better word. I'm just curious, again, educate me here. Why would not like the roof A and B replacement not be a candidate for MSBA?
We actually did talk about that, and initially my hope was that would be the case. The timeline is our problem, because if we were to go that route with the A and B roof, it would mean that the very earliest we can imagine starting work would be the summer of 2028, which means that many more winters to get through. And I am very concerned about the state of that roof. It feels too risky to me to wait for the MSBA. I feel like we can do that with the other projects, but this one, it's a safety issue fundamentally for me. And I don't want to risk other kind of building systems being impacted by roof failure. We've seen that happen in this community before. So.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we saw what happened a couple of years ago at Hastings and right. The disaster it created there. So very supportive of the need. I quite honestly, as a graduate at 86 from that high school, I'm still sort of shocked that the same roof is on there after all these years. I'm glad it's lasted this long. I guess not being an architect, but I built houses. I am curious as to what are the elements of the repair, meaning you've got a number of mechanical units on top of that. Are those in any way in scope to be touched, upgraded, moved? I mean, is that part of the process that they take them off, replace them?
That's a good
with new or like?
No. So we are actually currently working out those sort of fine-tuned details. We do have a lot of mechanical units on the roof, including there are different vents. There's some actual HVAC units themselves. we are looking at this as a roof project, not an HVAC project. So we're trying to be mindful about kind of containing it and doing what we can to keep those existing units viable. If we, in the process, it is a good time if there are a couple of those that are in dire straits, those can be incorporated in because, you're up there anyway and doing all the work, you may as well plug them in. We actually have it in-house right now, a number of the exhaust fans that could be installed. And so we can, since we already own them, that can be incorporated into the project. But we're, looking at all the mechanicals, that's a separate issue and something we also need to do.
But it does, I mean, I guess,
They do unplug them and work it.
Yeah, no, it just opens up a question around contingency. Are these figures that you're giving inclusive of contingency?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah.
If
They're
I may just,
inclusive of both contingency and the OPM costs because it hits the threshold for OPM.
Can I
Okay.
ask a follow-up? Can I ask a follow-up on the MSBA funding?
Yes.
So I realize the high school is built in a property that was previously demolished during the 1953 tornado. So I can understand why roof uplift, like
Yes.
just reading that
It
sounds frightening,
It's very
right?
terrifying, yes.
Okay, but so your architect might not be tasked with this, but they and potentially consultants the town could hire can help you with a risk analysis, right? So if the MSBA funding is similar to the 49.1%, that's an enormous benefit if the risk can be managed for the next 3 years, right? So wind follows paths. It's like based on obstacles and what have you, right? And there could be, so remember I was discussing hold downs, right? So there could be ways of managing the risk. So I would just mention that. I understand it's like, it just provokes fear and it's an incredible deferred maintenance issue. Like that's a really long time to have a roof on. But a risk study might be worth the MSBA match, right? And I can't imagine that MSBA wouldn't see this as a good, well, I don't know MSBA, but it seems like an important project for the town. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it's
I
anywhere,
appreciate that. I mean, another
Yeah.
factor that we are thinking about is, in addition to kind of the immediacy of the need, it's also sort of where does this chunk of funding fall in the long-term capital plan? So this was, in terms of when to spend money on what and how much, this was a nice fit for this particular fiscal year. So that's helpful too.
yeah, it's just interesting. I'm very interested to hear those comments because when I look at it, it'll just use the numbers you've thrown out on the other project of 49%, on $5.7 million. That's a tremendous amount of money. And that is more, I'll say, appealing from potential free cash use than 5.7 million. This isn't, you're not proposing this as free cash. It's proposed as a bond. And what I don't see here right now, and nobody's presented this, but there's a cost to bond, right? So that 5.7 million, I don't know what the number would be over the length of the bond, but it's going to be a bigger number than 5.7 million. But if we either borrowed half, meaning 51%, or took a portion of it in free cash or all of it in free cash, be a tremendous cost savings to the community in there. So to hear that there might be something that you could talk to the architect about, like temporary, to get us by for the next 2 or 3 years until this does qualify for MSBA, I'd love to hear more on that. The answer may be no, but I would love to hear that.
We're happy to follow up with them. I'll mention one other thing, which is the architect did indicate that there is some competitive advantage to being off cycle from the MSBA process in terms of the number. This roof, there are relatively few contractors that can actually do this roof. And so if we go out on cycle with everybody else who's in full roof replacement, it means we're competing for the same set of contractors, which basically limits our options and may even push the project timeline out further. So whereas the restoration's an easier, like the mill pond's an easier project, for example. But this one, it's big. It involves, big equipment, and there are very few. They basically said there are like 5 or 6 people in the state, I think, who can actually handle this roof project.
But wait, don't those contractors also do other modified bit roofs for other public entities that are not MSBA?
Sure. But
So,
it's,
I mean,
the number of schools throughout the Commonwealth with this issue
Yeah.
is manifold. So I think you got that.
Yeah, no,
Deferred maintenance isn't just a problem here.
I'm very supportive of the solution here. I just, just trying to be fiscally wise. So I appreciate the presentation and
Of course, yeah. And we can follow up with the GRLA about the risk assessment part too.
The only thing I wanted to add is on the tables that you have in front of you, the very bottom of those tables is showing you how much funding is available in each year, and that's in terms of free cash. So the line that says CFMP estimated range, that's 1% of our operating budget. And our fiscal management policies, our comprehensive fiscal management policies, which is what that stands for, says that we should be spending 1 to 1.5% of free cash. And then the line right below it says what the 1.5% is. So the point of me saying that is that even if we were to get MSBA funding for this particular project, it would actually exceed the amount of free cash that we use and would not allow any other projects in that year. So in terms of free cash as being an option, with MSBA funding, it would far exceed what we would be able to do in 1 year for free cash.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from there, Christy, and I completely support that financial logic, except for, if this was an option, right? So the benefit of staying within those financial guidelines is that we maintain our AAA bond rating. Huge benefit to the community, right? We want to maintain that. And the way you do that is by adhering to the policies that the town has set forward. So that's why we want to try to stay in between there. The issue is, though, if we could save potentially millions of dollars in borrow money to offset that free cash use, you actually might be beneficial. So it's a risk that you could take to if you save that money on the borrow by using free cash. We're talking 2-3 years out now, depending on the answer as to whether or not the roof could even be temporarily modified, whether or not it would even qualify for MSBA. There's a lot of wheels that need to move here, but it's just something that I think people need to be aware of.
Sure.
So if I can also build off another conversation you'd started about the other items on the roof. I remember a couple of years ago, we spent about $400,000 because there's very poor cell phone reception throughout the entire building. And we had to put in monitors specifically for emergency use vehicle, communication within the building.
Right.
Still hasn't helped my kids use their cell phones there, but they're out of graduate, so I'm not worried about them anymore. But I guess when we're pulling the top off, I mean, I would want to know that the police, fire, ambulance did not have an opportunity to say, hey, there's something else we could do while we have the roof off to do something that might be contributing to the safety. So it's a question I would ask that they be asked about the opportunities for.
Sure, that's a good bet. And we also did loop back to the engineers around solar. And would the restored roof be solar ready or the repaired roof be solar ready? And the answer to that is yes.
Great, thank you.
Important point.
I would just point out one other criteria with regards to moving away from our fiscal management policies is that if it does impact our credit rating, you may save now, but it costs you in the long run. So that's one of the reasons why maintaining that AAA is so important, because again, you might save $2 million now, but in your future borrowings, where you may need to borrow bigger numbers at a different time of our fiscal status, it may cost you in the end when you're getting a higher interest rate. So you just want to balance that relative to how you intend to spend free cash now versus planning.
John, you're absolutely right. I guess my point that I would just bring up is it's always worth the conversation, right? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but in this case, Paul might actually make out more money. So it depends. He's right. There is a risk associated whether or not Moody's or whoever, I forget who our bond raters are, might drop the rating as a result of a one year change in that. And, but if the town saves a couple $1 million, maybe that bond rating the next year gets booted back up. I don't know. I mean, it's all just a good conversation.
I think ultimately what we're talking about is a $5.7 million project. So if half of that was paid for with MSBA, it wouldn't cost us millions of dollars.
Well, right. The desire would be first. I mean, obviously the borrow would be half of that, would be half the interest on that borrow. So that's definitely an option. I'm not saying that's ruled out. And then you could even half that further by taking a half of that 2 point whatever million, 25% of that cost, and saying I want to use that with free cash. Then it drops it below that number, that threshold that we're talking about for free cash use in a single year. So there's opportunities. You could lower your borrow by using some free cash.
I just want to be mindful of time, and I know people are you were in the middle of asking questions, so if you had new lines of thought.
Can I
I
share
think-
one
I think-
other, just clarifying point that Anita ran up here and told me, which is the 49.19% is exclusive of contingency, the OPM, and design. So we have to strip those parts out. So it's that is our current rate for the actual construction part, not the other pieces of the puzzle. So it's not going to be exactly that. It'd be a little
And you
less.
just reminded me of another question. I guess we're not actually into the MSBA process yet. You're in the grant writing process.
The next window doesn't open until January of 2027.
Okay.
And that's really if it were this January, I think I would have, proposed that up front, just because I think that timeline would have felt more manageable to me. But given the kind of, the amount of time it can take to work with the MSBA, and also the fact we wouldn't even be able to apply until 2027, it just pushes things out pretty far.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was it.
Do you recall if we apply in January 27, and when will the answer come from them?
It'd be later that spring. The window closes in March, so usually between March and June is around when people are notified. And then there's a whole kind of march through the process with them in terms of identifying an OPM, getting design, all those pieces. Now, we do have, we've done some of the work up front, so we have that as an advantage. But even with that, the earliest we'd be able to conceivably get started would be summer of 28. And there are instances where it's taken even longer. So
I'm thinking of the other option that we don't get it. Then we would find out in mid 27. So then we would have to go back to town and ask for the borrow in the fall of 27.
In all of these cases, we have to ask up front for the full cost to borrow anyway. So that's, that would be less of a concern. But it does delay our timeline, because if we have asked for this, gotten granted, we wait for MSBA. Let's say MSBA says no, and now we've missed bidding.
Right.
And so now we'll have to wait anyway, right? So the waiting for them to say yes or no just delays us regardless. Yeah.
Other questions? Just very quickly, I was wondering, it looks like the roofs for the high school have very oddly specific prices, whereas Hastings seems like just 1,200. So could you speak whether we're talking about a rough order of magnitude at this point, or how concrete do we think these estimates are?
In terms of the,
I guess there's three of them, because there's a 1.2 million, and then there's the down to the dollars.
right. So I think the 1.2 million is a little rougher, because the most recent cost estimate we had for that was from a couple years ago, and we've just kind of reached back out to ask, what would the escalation look like?
Okay.
So that's a little bit rougher than the high school. The high school's, this is a, hot off the presses number.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all I had. Any other questions? Thank you very much,
Thank you
Allison.
very
I
much.
appreciate you sticking around so late. So part of this was the second last item was going to be discussion of project evaluations. Christy, was that something you wanted to speak to?
Sure. So I'll send out the updated ratings sheet. The only department you have left to hear from is the fire department, which we'll hear from him on the 3rd. So if you want to work on your rate sheets, we can potentially have some sort of closeout discussion at the next meeting. And then I just wanted to mention that the next meeting is actually going to be in the Great Hall, so that we don't conflict with the school committee meeting.
Thank you for the heads up. That's a Wednesday as well, isn't it?
Yeah, December 3rd
Okay.
And
at 5 o'clock.
And the rate sheets are going to be due December 8th, if I remember correctly. Is that right? Is that
I don't think that we've set a date yet.
okay? I thought I saw a date somewhere. Okay.
Maybe we did. I guess it depends on how the December 3rd meeting goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But to your point, we can do a lot of it before then. Like
Right.
you've heard from just about everybody.
Exactly.
This can be an involved process. It'd be recommended that we put an effort. No one's checking your homework. So just for your own sanity, while these topics are fresh, I recommend, taking a first whack at it at this point.
And we'll continue to send out, we've sent out all of the presentations that you've received so far, so we'll send the ones out from tonight. There were also some follow-up questions, so I did send some answers to those. If I missed some, please let me know. I know we're still waiting on the response related to the fire department AV system.
Thank you.
Christy, just being new on this committee, I just got a question on the process. Is it the similar process we've used on the select board side in regards to the ratings, where you'll present us an average of what the scores are from everybody, or how do those get merged?
You submit your ratings to me. So once and then we'll put them into a spreadsheet. We don't typically identify people. We just look at the averages. And
So we'll have a full list of all the numbers, and then an average of each of all of them. Okay,
Yep.
terrific.
And what you'll find is that everybody brings their own sort of comfort of rating to it.
Yep.
And as long as you're internally consistent with your own ratings, the fact that my average may be 25 and somebody else's average may be 12 is not relevant, because as long as you've been consistent internally, it all works its way through the spreadsheet. So
One
that's
thing,
the tough thing.
oh, sorry.
Please.
One thing that's different this year is that we did do that upfront work ahead of time with the department heads, with everyone that you've heard from, in terms of they have proposed the projects that fit within our comprehensive fiscal management policies. So in past years, I think we've had situations where the requests have exceeded our ability to fund. That is not the case this year. So again, if you look at that first table, you'll see that there's still capacity within the fiscal management policies.
And is there going to be guidance from you as to how much of that free cash you want us to spend? Are we looking to spend all of it?
So what I would recommend is the way that it's proposed. So the free cash I think we have is let's see. So our range related to our policies is about 1.4 million to 2.1 million. And currently we have projects proposed to be funded through free cash of about 1.5 million. I think one of the things with the 630,000 that's sort of left over is that we did hear from Chief Minardi that he is unsure about his mobile command vehicle and his ability to get grants for that. And so right now, this is only anticipating $100,000 towards that project with free cash. If he were unable to get the grant funding, it would take about half of what is available.
Thank you. I see that we have minutes to approve.
Yeah.
They were shared, right? Okay.
They were emailed.
I do remember seeing the minutes. So, actually, there's 2 sets of minutes. 3 sets of minutes. Dear Lord, they're multiplying. Minutes from March 18th.
Yeah. So, so when you have your last meeting, we have to
Yep.
wait until you meet again. As a body, you can approve those minutes, even if some of you are new to the committee.
Okay.
But I think most of you were on it last year.
So,
Would you like a motion?
what's that? Yeah, I'd like a motion, please.
I'll move to approve the meeting minutes of March 18th, 2025, November 12th, 2025, and November 19th, 2025.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Vote. Raise your hand. All approve?
Aye.
All deny? Abstain? We have 7-0-0 for approval of the minutes. That leaves one more motion to make.
Move
Anybody-
to adjourn.
Second.
All approve? Adjournment? Thank you very much. 7-0-0 on adjourning. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you.